Welcome to Hope Academy. My name is Mr. O, and today I'm going to be going over the Math Set 2 Practice Exams 2 from the ACT Practice ACT website. That being stated, usually when I do these problems, I go over them real quick and then explain in depth how I was able to do the question so quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So for number one, I'm going to go ahead and get set up so that you can see the whole problem and so on. So number one, I'm going to go ahead and start. Okay. Delete cruise. Straight line with the cruise turning. Okay, one turn. Screw 2.5 inches and a lead of 1/8 inch. How many glue turns will it get all the way into the piece? There's a lead. Okay, so you're allowed a calculator, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So. Oops. Okay, that's better. Okay. So for number one, my final answer is D. And now I'm going to go ahead and explain to you how I was able to get to the answer so quickly. So for number one specifically, the thing that I had to work through or sort of understand was the terminology, because the key thing when I was doing this question was I skimmed through it but realized I needed some key words. So like the lead, they mentioned that the lead is the distance that the screw advances in a straight line when the screws turn completely one turn. And so they tell me the screw is 2.5 inches long, or 2.5, and they say it's 1/8. And so what I did, and they say that the lead is 1/8. So that means that basically I had to do was 2.5 divided by that 1/8. And so when I was dividing by 1/8, I want to just know what 1 divided by 8 is, and it's going to be 0.125. So I basically divided these two values, ended up with the answer 20. Thus how I was able to get to the final answer of D, and that concludes my explanation for number one. And to continue on to the next question. So for number two. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So it'll be. Okay. So x plus multiply x squared. 30x plus 0. So. Let's think. So 144 factors. Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to think about this. 24. Oh, okay, I see. So x minus 6, x minus 24, x equals to 24. So that means that x will has to be 24. So this will be 24, this will be 6. So 24 minus 6 will be 18. Okay, so for number two, my final answer is H. And now I'm going to go ahead and explain to you how I was able to get to this answer. So for specifically number two, the thing that I was working out was that I did the process of substitution. So I'm going to go ahead and write it. So I'm going to move the paper behind it away. So the process I used was sort of substitution. And so the importance about substitution, the process of substitution, is that I basically do is get rid of one variable so that it's not a bother, so that I could work through the rest of the problem. And so what I mean by that, and I'm going to go ahead and get a separate piece of paper so I could explain that more in depth, is the fact that in the beginning they give you these two equations. And they also mentioned that x is greater than y, which is not so important at the moment, but I will explain soon enough what I mean, why this is important later on. But that being stated, so I want to just do the equation where I'm just solving for x. And so what happened was that I intentionally moved the x over, divided by x on both sides, so that I could get y equals to 144 over x. And so that means that I can replace this y value with this y. Since this y, and I'm going to use colors right here so that you could follow along, this y and this y, I'm going to replace it with this 144 over x, which is the substitution process. And thus, now my equation is going to say y plus 144 over x equals to 30. And then I multiply both sides by x, like this, which will help me eventually get x squared plus 144 equals to 30x. And then I subtract the 30x. And I did skip some steps in this process that I'm showing very thoroughly. You don't need to show all this work to order to get to this plus 144 equals to 0. And so you don't need to show all the steps. If you can mental math some parts, it will save you some time, and so that will also help. But afterwards, when I got to this point, I understood that I needed to solve for x, and the only way I could solve it is by using the process, the factoring process. So I factor. And so in order to factor this, I was looking for sort of multiples that exist. So because I already knew that 12 times 12 is 144, but that's not going to help me get to this value of 30. And so what I did was right here on the calculator was actually, I just decided to choose 6. It was sort of a flux sort of choice. It was just a random guess that maybe 6 might work. Maybe 4 would have worked. I didn't know during the moment. So I just did 144 divided by 6 to see if I get a clean answer. I got 24. And I understood. Now, when I factor this, if this is two values, negative values, I have to add up to this because the two values that are negative multiply to become positive. Thus, I knew 144 was the case. So I understood that negative 24, negative 6 will become negative 30x. And thus, I got x minus 6, x minus 24 through this sort of logic. Be aware that this is also requires a little bit of practice to order to get to this point. But that being stated, that sort of will help you understand this, or you could sort of like, test it out, a bunch of different even values to sort of test it out, or odd values, okay? And then in the end, I got x minus 6 equals to 0, x minus 24 equals to 0, and I got plus 6, so x equals to 6, and I'm going to move it up, plus 24, and I got x equals to 24. And so these are the two potential values for x. That means that also, I want to bring it back to the original question up here. Duly note that x plus y will add up to 30, which is going to be the case for 24 and 6. They're going to add up to 30. But the big issue is that, remember from before, there was a condition that was mentioned right here. This condition is important because if I know that x is greater than y, that means that my x is going to actually be 24, thus my y is going to be 6. So since x is equal to 24, I'm going to move it up so you can see this, and y equals to 6, they're asking in the end, that's not my final answer. They're asking what's x minus y. So x minus y will be 24 minus 6, which is going to be 18. And thus, from the prior question for number 2, I got my final answer as h. And that concludes my explanation for number 2. And to continue on to the last question, so for number 3, and I'm going to go ahead and bring the other sheet because this is cut off, so that you could see the whole problem, okay? So number 3 is right here. I'm going to move it down a little bit so you can see it. Okay, go ahead and go ahead and get started. So number 3, which of the following is the sine of angle A in the figure below? For angle A, so angle A, sine, opposite, hypotenuse, 13. Okay, so for number 3, my final answer is C. And now I'm going to go ahead and explain to you how I was able to get to this answer. So for number 3, the method you need to know for certain to be able to solve this is a method called SOHCAHTOA. And what is SOHCAHTOA? So the SOHCAHTOA method is a sort of acronym that exists that we usually teach in the end of Algebra 2 and is also taught in pre-calculus. But SOHCAHTOA represents specific components. So it represents sine, opposite, and I'm going to write it downwards on purpose so you can see it, opposite, hypotenuse, and I know this is not the most easiest method. And then for C is going to start representing cosine, adjacent, I'm going to keep going right here, and hypotenuse. And lastly, is going to be TOA, which is going to represent tangent. And I'm doing these in different colors on purpose so you can see the layout. Opposite and adjacent, like this. Okay, and so each of these acronyms represents different components of like sort of a fraction format. So for example, because right now the question's asking for the sine of angle A, that means that I'm using the S because sine, right here, S-I-N, and I should just add the E for the full spelling. So sine is going to represent right there for this question particularly. So I'm going to go ahead and focus on this component right here. And so when I'm focusing on this part right here for this particular question right here, the thing you need to remember is that the actual setup for this will be, as I mentioned, sine. So sine of x equals to opposite over hypotenuse. So I'm going to shorthand it to HYP. Okay. And so when I'm working through the sine is equals to opposite over hypotenuse, this is in relation to the triangle that is given to us. So that means that based on this triangle angle A, that means that from the triangle angle A, I'm going to draw an arrow right across from this, and that literally means that's going to represent whatever the side that's right up opposite from it will be opposite. And so for this scenario, my opposite for this question will actually be 12. And so I'm going to write 12. And that hypotenuse will always be the longest side of the right triangle. Okay, and so the longest side here is 13. So over 13. Thus how I was able to get to the final answer of C. And that concludes my explanation for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, so that we can continue to make content like this. I hope you have a wonderful day.